Oh, the birds and the bees. Did you ever have that discussion with your parents? It was probably very uncomfortable, but I make you a promise this discussion's not going to be very uncomfortable. I'm going to have a discussion not about birds and bees with you, but I'm going to have a discussion about wasp and bees with you. And this is an analogy that I will keep going over and over and over until you get very comfortable with what it means and what I'm trying to get across. Okay? All right, so what is this story with wasp and bees? Imagine that I give you a box and I say, don't open that box yet. It's not Valentine's Day. But inside of this box, let's say that I've got some beautiful, pretty little bees with stingers that won't sting you unless you bother them. And then let's say that I've got nasty, mean wasp. And I give you this crate in the laboratory, and I say it's your job to separate all of the bees from the wasp. I hope that you wouldn't sit there with a pair of tweezers all day and separate every bee from every wasp. Because what if there were thousands? There's got to be a better way of doing this, right? There's got to be a better way to separate all of the birds from, or all of the wasp from all of the bees and not be stung. Maybe you're allergic. Okay, so with some creativity, you could maybe take this crate and you could go up to some kind of tunnel. And this tunnel will basically give the bees and the wasp some space to move around. So you can open this crate up, and now all of the bees will fly into this tunnel, and then all of the wasp will fly into the tunnel, and they will go out the other end. Well, if it's just a tunnel or a piece of tubing, it's not going to do you any good, right? You're not separating here. You're just making them fly a little bit down this tunnel, and they're eventually going to come out the other end, and they're going to all be clustered just like they were before, and you're not going to be able to separate them. So that's stupid. But with a little more creativity, you could play off of what they like. What do bees like that wasps do not? Well, that's a pretty little flower. So, down here at the bottom of this tunnel, I'm going to put pretty little flowers. And all of those pretty little flowers are going to line up down the bottom. And they're going to be like little chocolate pieces of candy. But they're only going to be little chocolate pieces of candy for the bees, right? So what will happen is that these bees will see these flowers, and the bees will say, hold up, I'm going to kind of come down here, and I'm going to land on this flower, and I'm going to kind of skip from flower to flower to flower, and I'm going to kind of take my time, and I'm going to go through this tunnel because I'm going to take advantage of this sweet little nectar down here at the bottom. All right, well, the wasp, as they come through this tunnel, they don't give a crap. They don't give a crap about the flowers. They could care less. So all of these wasps will come through, and they basically will zoom through the tunnel because they could care less about the flower. And what you have successfully done now is that you have held back one group, and you have allowed the other group to go on their merry little way. All right, so all of the wasp will come out first. Chances are they'll come off in a big cluster because they're all kind of migrating the same distance at the same time. But every now and then you might get one or two leaders, and you might get one or two stragglers that come off. That's no big deal. But they're all going to basically come out of the column at one time, or the tunnel. All right, well, the bees are eventually going to make their way out, right? The bees are going to make themselves out, and they're going to go out in a cluster as well, because they're all going to take kind of the same amount of time, flower to flower to flower, and they just keep hopping back and forth. They'll land on one, and then they move to the next, and then finally the bees will come out, but they're going to come out second. This allows you to separate two things automatically just by playing off of what one group likes and what the other one does not. This is the field of chromatography. What we've done here is that I have taken a sample, and this sample is more than one component. And the sample has been introduced into the tunnel, or what we call the column. And this column provides the opportunity for you to separate your two things from each other, or maybe multiple things from each other. The flowers that I have chosen here for the tunnel represent the stationary phase. This is what I have filled the column with that the bees are attracted to. And notice that I said the bees come on one flower and they stay there for a while, and then they migrate and they go to another flower, and they hop from one to the next, right? They're getting lagged behind. It's taking longer for them to go through the column, and that's due to the interaction with the stationary phase. The air really provides them the opportunity to fly. Now, here I'm kind of stretching it a little bit, but the air that's in this tunnel is allowing them to basically go through the tunnel at a rate that's comfortable with them, and that is what we're going to be calling the mobile phase. All right, so the mobile phase in this example is air, and the stationary phase in this example is a flower. Well, here's the thing with chromatography, and this is where it begins to get complicated. Let's say that I change the mobile phase, and let's say that instead of air, I've chosen water. That means that this tunnel, after I let the bees and the wasp go inside of the tunnel and start to see the flowers and start to fly through, let's say that I pick the wrong mobile phase. And this time, let's say that I pick water. And I take water and I fill it in the tunnel. No separation is going to take place. The wasp and the bees are basically going to drown in the water, and you're going to flush them out all at one time. And that doesn't really achieve what you want to achieve with the column and the flowers and the whole setup, right? You're not separating anything. So it's very important to choose the correct mobile phase in order for your separation to take place. The same thing can be said about the stationary phase. So let's say that instead of flowers, I chose something like chocolate bars. All right, so I'm going to put a chocolate bar down here at the bottom of the tunnel before I let the wasp and the bees go through. And I open the crate up, and the wasp come in and the bees come in, and they see these chocolate bars lined up down the bottom of this tunnel. And you know what? They don't care. They don't care about that chocolate bar. Neither one of them do. So they're going to just basically zoom on through the tunnel and come out the other end, and separation does not take place. So it's very important to choose the proper stationary phase as well. And this is where complications begin to happen in the world of chromatography, because people are very uncomfortable with picking out the proper stationary phase or picking out the proper mobile phase. Well, this is things that you learn with time. And as a laboratory analyst, these things will be decided for you before you even do certain testing using a chromatography instrument. If they're not chosen for you and you are responsible for making the choice, a lot of times it's trial and error. So most of the time when you pick out a stationary phase and mobile phase and you think it's the right one, it might not be the right one. And you'll have to do a second choice or a third choice or a fourth choice. And maybe 100 choices later, you finally get it down to the proper combination of mobile phase and stationary phase. So don't feel bad if you can't pick out the proper settings in the very beginning of a chromatography method. This takes time, it takes experience, it takes a little bit of working knowledge with these compounds before you can start to make those leaps and bounds through the chromatography field. All right? Okay, notice that I keep talking about the speed. I'm saying that the wasp will go straight through and the bees will take a little bit of time. Another definition that we can talk about here is something called retention time. And retention time is abbreviated with a T for time and a little bitty R that sits down below that stands for retention. So retention time is basically the speed, or how long does it take these components to go through the column. The wasp will go straight through. So the wasp will have a very low retention time. The bees are going from flower to flower to flower, and they're being held back a little bit more. So the bees are actually going to have a higher retention time because of that. Most of the time, we talk about retention time in form of minutes. Now, this does not have to be the case every single time, of course, but we can talk about how many minutes did the wasp take in the tunnel before they came out the other end. How many minutes did the bees take in the tunnel before the bees came out the other end? That is what we call retention time, and those are numbers that are going to be very important for us to work with and maybe do some calculations with. But that's the definition of retention time. How long are they retaining? That's the word retention inside of the column before we start to see them come out of the other end of that tunnel. Okay? All right, so that's where I'll stop this video. If you need a potty break, go take one. Get some popcorn, get some drinks, non-alcoholic preferably. Don't want you tipsy when you're taking these notes and studying for a test. You can do that on the weekends after you take the test.